In this video, we'll take a look at how bullet dynamics can be applied to bonds. This feature can totally enhance character animation, making applying realistic secondary action something extremely easy to do. Applying bullet dynamics to bonds is not so different than applying it to objects or nulls. The great advantage is that bonds can deform a mesh and replace soft bodies techniques that in some cases can be slower to be calculated. Let's create a null, and then let's draw a bond chain. All we need to do to make the bonds dynamic is to select them in order. In this case, they've been created in the right order, so all we have to do is to click with the right mouse button. We can now click on point to point to have the constraint created and the bonds converted to dynamic objects. Let's hit play, and we can see how dynamics are now controlling the bonds. We can notice how bullet is making the first selected bond a kinematic object, so it just doesn't fall down with the other bonds, while all the others are simple rigid bodies. Of course, we can always change the dynamic type as we like, so we can make this bond, for example, rigid. In this case, everything is falling down, or select the last one and make it kinematic. So now we have the opposite result. If we make the first bond kinematic again, that's the result we get. We can notice how, in this case, it is taking a little too long for the chain to get to a rest position. We can change this easily, selecting all the bonds and changing the damping value to something like 80%, for example. So now, if we play the animation, we get something a little more realistic. Something very important, which is valid not only for bonds but in general for all rigid bodies, is that they are independent than the defined hierarchy in layout. So if we go to frame 0, select all the bonds and parent them to the null they belong to, we can see how the hierarchy is still respected. That's because it's defined by the constraint linking the several rigid bodies we can find in this bond chain. We can now move the bonds around like this. And get a totally different result. As we can move the bonds, well, we can do the same with the constraints. So you can see how it works. Each time we make a bonded dynamic object, a shape is assigned. By default, the capsule shape. We can change this anytime. So we can select, for example, box or sphere. And notice something immediately. As you can see, those two bonds are not colliding. This is happening because the constraint that is linking them has enable collision off. So let's turn it on and we will see the difference now. Normally you don't need collision between two linked objects to happen, but of course if you want it to happen, and sometimes like in this case you really want it, you can use this enable collision option. Dynamic bonds can collide with any other bullet object, so let's create a null and let's make it a kinematic body. If we hit play now, we can see the collision taking place. We can animate the kinematic body, of course, and have the chain collide without problems. Bond dynamics in LightWave 2015 are very intuitive and easy to use. In one of the next videos, we're going to learn how to use this feature to animate the feelers of this ant, so we'll be able to apply the same technique to tails and other dynamic elements whose default pose needs to be preserved. Thank you for listening.